You know, everybody talks about African American activists in the civil rights movement, and they talk about northern whites who came down to help. But whoever talks about southern whites who sought equality? I'll tell you, the answer is nobody. It was too dangerous. We couldn't run home up north.
As in every community in Mississippi, there is segregation of the races. Drinking fountains are segregated. Restrooms are segregated. The local theater is segregated. Negroes sit in the balcony. There is only one swimming pool in Forest for white only.
White supremacy ethos was so, it had been ingrained for generations and generations. And that was just the worst taboo, to violate the code and violate solidarity on white supremacy and segregation.
If there were white people from Mississippi that was found to be assisting, cooperating, and aiding those of us that was a part of the civil rights movement, they would be considered a traitor to their race.
It wasn't enough to be silent even. The circumstance, the situation, the culture, and the organized resistance to integration required affirmative support for massive resistance. The silent person was suspect. The person who occasionally questioned the orthodoxy was an enemy, and a person who persistently questioned orthodoxy when it came to segregation was a danger to the society, which had to be removed one way or another.
My 54th birthday was no big deal on the surface, but I was uneasy about it, and I didn't really pinpoint why until I realized that Daddy was 54 when he died. And the circumstances of him dying when he was 54 were bad. I couldn't look for the truth back then because I was too bloody and had to find a way to recover from what had happened to my father. My first experience in looking at the issue of race was going to my grandmother's house on a rainy Sunday afternoon. Being probably 8 or 9 years old and reading old Reader's Digest, and what I read astounded me. 2 men bragged about killing this 14-year-old young man named Emmett Till. And they admitted to killing him, and they said that he had whistled at a white woman, and that when a black man, they didn't say black man, they said when, quote, when a nigger talks about having sex with a white woman, he's tired of living. I asked my father, I said, how can this happen? They said they killed him. They said that they killed him and they didn't go to jail. They didn't have to go to prison or anything. How can that happen? And my father said, well, baby, I can't answer that. I said, well, who can? He said, well, you'd have to ask J Edgar Hoover about that. I said, well, what's his address? So my father went to the post office and he got J Edgar Hoover's address. So I wrote him a letter, and later I remember coming home from school and there was a letter, a typewritten letter in my name, Sally Ann Harrison, from the Federal Bureau of Investigations and J Edgar Hoover. And the tone was, "We've received your letter and this case is closed and these records are sealed and no further inquiries can be made about this case." I was surprised at the tone of the letter. I don't know what I expected. Being in the 4th grade, I didn't have my politics weren't really grounded, but I didn't expect shut up was the tone of the letter.
Now, I can tell you what I did when Emmett Till was murdered. See, there where we lived in LaFleur County, his body was found there. George Smith was a sheriff. And these two men admitted to George that they kidnapped the boy. They took him from his granddaddy's house. Admitted that. So I said, "George, why don't you try those dudes for kidnapping when something you know you can convict?" He said, "You better quit talking so much, Francis."
There were things I knew and things I didn't know. I didn't know that my mother had challenged the sheriff about the two men who had killed Emmett Till. And I didn't know how radical it was that my father encouraged me to go ask J Edgar Hoover, who was the highest law enforcement authority in the land, about what happened to Emmett Till. But I did know that 10 miles up the road was Money, Mississippi. And that's where Emmett Till had whistled at a white woman when he was 14 years old. And his beaten, mutilated body had been found in the Tallahatchie River. I could look outside my elementary school window and look up the road to the bridge where the Tallahatchie River flowed. And I was beginning to learn that segregation wasn't the rosy picture that the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission put on it.
This atmosphere of mutual respect, understanding, and pride in achievement depends upon a system of social segregation. It has made possible cooperation without friction, progress for both races without chaos and strife.
Under all those protestations of the good people who had founded the Citizens Council was an absolutely iron determination that by all necessary means segregation was going to be preserved. And it was represented by the protection they gave in the Delta to Bryant and Milam at the time of the Emmett Till trial, as they were to give it over and over again to those who were implicated in deaths in Belzoni. Well, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but throughout the Delta.
In the late 50s and 60s, when I was growing up, Mississippi was bleak and very harsh. Segregation was the law of the land, and it permeated every part of society. My parents, though, believed in justice and equality for everyone. I learned to question what authority was doing because Mother and Daddy did.
Both of our parents tried to instill in us do the right thing or to treat people fairly. And that's the thing that stands out about my mother and my father, is that, I saw how they reacted to black people, and it was respectful. And we had this every day of our lives.
Well, Henry had taught school, and then he worked for the employment service. And he got worn out, and he decided he'd get into the shoe business, used goods business, and army goods business. And he did, and he opened up a store, and I helped him with that, and he did real well.
And my father, being a businessman, he catered to blacks and whites. I looking back, I can see how nobody else I knew whose father had a business had blacks working at his store. But I didn't know that when I was a child. It just all seemed to be normal in the way things were.
For them to hire a black woman as a sales clerk during that period in time, it was a brave, bold movement. I know to us now it seems like nothing, but given the time that this happened in, and because of how the state was run and how those in power saw things, it was a very brave and courageous move for them to have someone black serving in a sales capacity.
One lady's name was Bessie Harris, who worked for me, and she had one boy next to the oldest named Freddie that never would mind her. And when they started, the civil rights people started marching around the courthouse, Freddie would get in that bunch, and Bessie wouldn't know it.
Greenwood, it was the headquarters for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
I remember Freddie. He wandered into the SNCC office in Greenwood, and he was just kind of looking around as if to say, well, I'm just checking the place out. And so we explained that we were there working on voter registration, trying to get voting rights for people and get them more involved in the political process so that they could become registered to vote and become first-class citizens. And he said, that sounds like something that I can do. And as we began to talk, he made mention that there were a number of other people that he knew that he felt would come out.
Somebody thought that Freddie was cutting my yard, and it was really his brother Alan. So I got a call from a Klansman. Told me I better get that nigger out of my yard. And so I thought to myself, if I hadn't had children or a dog, I wouldn't have done a blooming thing.
My mother believed it was Curtis Underwood, a person from Greenwood Police Department, who had made that call because she had seen him ride by the house on his motorcycle before. So that was upsetting. I didn't understand it at all. In 1964, there was the Freedom Summer to promote African American voter registration. By 1966, as a result of all of the resistance to voter registration, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is called SNCC, organized a boycott against white businesses. The racial tension was everywhere. There were many demonstrations in Greenwood. There were civil rights workers in my father's store, but for teenagers like my older brother Hank and me, it was just a backdrop to us wanting to have fun. Now for Hank, that meant football games, dating his girlfriend, enjoying life. He was just getting started, or so we thought.
It was in the last day of July 1966. It was All-Star Weekend. He came home, I think on Thursday, and got his daddy's car. And so I told him, I said, you just have yourself a real good time now. And I love you. And Sally and I went to Philadelphia, Mississippi.
He was with his friend, John Blackman, who had an Austin Healey Sprite. And on the Big Black River Bridge, on the way to Vicksburg, a trucker apparently had a heart attack, and the truck jackknifed, completely covering the bridge, and there was no way for the car to go except into the truck. My father's heart was broken. My mother's heart was broken. He was buried on Saturday, and Sunday night, it was raining outside lightly. It was about 10 o'clock at night. My father got a call to come to his store, and I wanted to go with him, and he wouldn't allow me. He said, no, the police think that the store has been burglarized and the burglar may still be in the store. So I told him to be careful. And he left in a light rain. And it got later and later and past midnight, and I could hear the grandfather clock ticking. And then later phone calls started coming in, and men from the police department would want to talk to my mother. The doctor had been to the house and given my mother a sedative. She had been distraught after Hank's death, the death of her son. And I said, no, I wasn't waking her up, and if they wanted to talk to anybody, they would have to talk to me. So I called my best friend, Alice Andrews, and asked her to come over, and my friend, Tommy Gardner. And he came over, and I said, I'm getting the runaround, and I'd like for you both to come over. There's something wrong here, and there's something's going on. I don't know what it is yet. But, could you come over and be with me? I think it's going to be a long night.
It seemed like a very long time that we waited. And it was hell not knowing.
And I think around 3 in the morning, Sis Brewerton, a neighbor, came over. And I said, would somebody please tell me what's going on? Somebody please tell me, what the hell is going on here? And she said, well, didn't you know there's been an accident? And your father's been killed. And the police thought that he was a burglar in your father's store.
The next morning, Curtis Leary was a police chief, and he's out at my house and had a press conference in my living room, and they could say everything except it was just a horrible error. It shouldn't have ever happened. And he said it wouldn't happen one, and I forgot how many. I said, Curtis, the fact remains that Henry's dead. He's just as dead as he would have been if anybody had meant to kill him.
After Hank and Henry were killed in July, the first part of August, and by September, I went to Delta State. My father had gone to Delta State. I wanted to go there, and my friends were going there. When I got to Delta State, the first black student had arrived, and things had picked up, and we worked on integration together. I remember when Ray Charles played at one of our dances, concerts, and things were changing. The night that Martin Luther King was killed in April of '68, the anger of my friends, my African-American friends, the anger and the rage and my shock and grief was something I'll never forget. The first weekend in December in '68, we were on our way to a Young Democrats conference.
I just remember that time we went to Jackson. There's, 6 of us in the car. Helen was driving, and we all worked on the school newspaper together. So when Don asked us for a ride to Jackson, I really didn't think anything about it.
Don Sutton was a leader and organizer. He's African-American. In the car with us, somehow Helen decides that she wants to stop at this truck stop.
On the way there, we got hungry and decided to stop at Yazoo City.
I had to change a $5 bill because I was paying for my Coke and Lucy McClung's Coke. That was a mistake.
And all of a sudden, these white men came outside and started calling us nigger lovers and whores and everything else, and beating on the glass with their fist and cans of beer. And I guess we panicked or whatever, but anyway, Helen took off. And then those men got in the truck and came behind us. A couple of times they bumped us and blowing the horn and flashing the bright lights on us, and we really got scared because we thought, well, if we go over, we're goners.
By the time I got out, Helen and Joanna and the rest of my party weren't here. Who was here was a woman in a 1959 rusted Plymouth Savoy with a wheel on back, and this man by then I think had spat on me and poured a beer on my head. And I said, is that any way for a gentleman to talk to a lady? At which point the woman got out of the car and said, lady? Why, ain't no lady would ride in the same car with a goddamn nigger. Why, you ain't nothing but a goddamn motherfucking little slut. And so she hauled off and slapped me. And I was shocked. I couldn't understand the sexual repercussions of this at all. And Lucy and I had sat at the curb, and I was praying, and Lucy was crying. And she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm praying. And I said, okay, God, you see what's going on now. You coming down here, aren't you? And the guy who owned the truck stop kind of kneed me in the back and said, get up and start moving. And I guess down there was where, down that ravine, is where we were directed to start walking. I looked over the hill, and suddenly I saw a silver blue Mustang coming over the hill, and I realized, oh my God, it was Wilma Blackman from Delta State, just showing up out of nowhere. I flagged her down. She stopped and said, get in the car. I was wearing a wig at the time, and it was wet from the beer. And I tipped my wig to the mob that was gathering, wished them a Merry Christmas, and got in the car, and we took off really, really fast. Now that was an absolute miracle that she showed up that night in Yazoo City out of nowhere. I had to thank God that that happened. I guess it would be a couple of weeks later, my mother insists that I go to a family reunion in Carthage, Mississippi. A lot of people were in attendance, and my uncles were just sitting around talking politics, and one of them talked about the civil rights workers in Yazoo City, Mississippi, trying to integrate a truck stop and how they were chased off because they were asking for it. I realized that they were talking about me and Joanna and my friends at that truck stop in Yazoo City. We weren't radical civil rights worker agitators that they thought we were. All we were doing was giving Don Sutton a ride. We didn't know that other people would see us as being radicals. We had no idea that this was dangerous. I got out of that room as fast as I could. I remember being in the kitchen. There was a wood stove back there. There was fried corn in a skillet. And I remember holding on to the stove and bracing myself. I was frightened. Not because I felt in danger then, but I felt then like I was getting away with crimes against their humanity, that I represented what my uncles believed could be tracked down and killed. The next year, 1969, I was living in Fugler Hammett dorm, and I dreamed that I woke up in the middle of the night. I was walking down the hall, and in this dream, I knew when I was going down that hall that I was about to see God. I walked down to the hall and got to the corner. At this intersection, I saw a black hand coming around the corner, and I realized then that that was the hand of God, and God was black. The next morning, I told everybody that I had had a dream and that I had seen God, and God's hand was black. And what if God is black? We may have a lot of explaining to do, and we had better be cleaning our act up as much as we could. What I learned from that dream is that God was a color so beyond my experience and my comprehension that my little trifling white world didn't have to do with what was holy and what was divine. That what was holy and what was divine was in the invisible, the part of society that was right in my face and it was overlooked and discounted. That in the poor sharecroppers, in the souls of black people, was the power and the spirit that would be strong enough to carry a whole movement for social change, and a spirit that would change American history. By 1970, I graduated from college. I had married Lewis Walton, and he got a job in Gainesville, Florida. I was ready to get out of Mississippi. I had someone to travel with. I was ready. Within a couple of years, I had Joan. I remember that Lewis used to be upset after we were divorced and been out of shape because she'd be playing with my little black baby dolls. So, God, Lewis, don't be ridiculous. But over the years, Joan always had African-American friends, and if she ever had a white boyfriend, well, she never told her mother about it. Now I'm the grandmother of 2 biracial grandsons. These little boys are holy. They are sacred. And when I think about the struggles that they are going to face, being identified as African American in this culture, the racism that I grew up with in Mississippi, and the Southern whites who perpetuated it, have been on my mind, and I wondered, what am I going to tell these children about their Southern white heritage? I want to tell them about my father and how different he was. But what if they ask me how he died? And I realized how little Garnet and I knew about Daddy's death and what really occurred there. There had been so much silence. In my whole adult life, I've been challenging authority as an activist and as a feminist, but I never questioned this basic thing in depth because really I wasn't woman enough to want to find out the truth about this. It might be a lot more than I could psychologically handle. And there were things that I was frightened to find out. What if this wasn't an accident? It's hard to deal with death. It's a lot harder to imagine murder, So I stayed away from this for as long as I could. Over the years, Garnet and I had pieced together a few things about what happened on the night of August 2nd, 1966.
There were burglars in the store. That's what he was told, and that he needed to come down and give the police the key so they could get in the building. And, you know, his thinking wasn't the greatest. He just got through burying Hank. He got there, and they tell him, you know, to open up the front door and to go to the back and open up the back door. I don't know that they were standing right there in the front to tell him to go open up the back, but that's what he did. And whoever was in the front of the building didn't tell Crowder in the back of the building. So Crowder is standing at right outside in the alley, and there's a huge metal door, and he is standing right there, and he shoots. I mean, he ain't 4 feet from the door. He is right at the door, and he shoots through the door, and it hits him right above the heart, and they take him to the hospital, and he dies shortly thereafter.
When I got to Greenwood, I went to the police department to find the police records. I dreaded doing it, but this is what I had come for.
Hello, how you doing?
Yeah, hi, Miss Holmes.
I'm Sarah.
Hi, hi.
Okay, you all want to come through this door? Right
Sure,
here?
thank you. Thank you for talking to me. This is what
Okay.
I'm looking for.
All right.
I'm looking for records that would have to do with the death of my father, Henry F. Harrison, in August of '66.
August of '66.
The
I know they say one was the officer, but do
two,
you
one's name was Crowder, and the other was Sudeth.
S-U-T-T-O-N?
Sudeth.
We couldn't find no Henry Harrison at all. I don't know, do they... And see, we went through all these. We took all these out, and we called ourselves looking for a Henry Harris, but we couldn't find no Henry Harris. But I don't know what Greenwood City Hall would hold that information or what.
Well, would there be a file on the police officer?
It should be a file somewhere, and I guarantee they keep that in City Hall. Maybe City Hall could help you all.
I had my doubts about City Hall having the police records, but I'd give it a try.
She was asking me a question about whether we could find something.
Hi, I'm Sally Harrison. I'm getting some information about an incident that happened with the Greenwood Police Department in 1966. And there should have been a record of a police shooting, and this would have been August 3rd, 1966, and it resulted in the death of my father. What I was hoping was that there would be a record of my father's death in the police department.
Anything that happened that involved the police department would be on record at the police department. What I can get you to fill out a request, a public records request, that's the most I can do. I mean, I have no idea what would have happened, you know, in the 60s.
It's right here in the Greenwood City Council's own records that their police officer shot Daddy, and they paid a very small amount. But beyond that, should have been some documentation of what the incident was, who was involved. I still needed to know how it happened. I thought the newspaper accounts might help. They were on microfilm at the Greenwood Public Library. The shooting occurred very late Tuesday night. On Wednesday, there's Daddy's obituary. There's this article about 3 Negro youths who admitted to burglarizing the store and being in the building. W.W. Smith finds them 3 days later, and they admit that they were the burglars. But that doesn't make sense. They weren't found on the scene, and there were no witnesses. So how could the police have linked them to the crime scene? So I decided to see about Daddy's old store. I couldn't get into the store that day. Maybe I could take a look through the back door that Crowder shot through. See if we can go. Oh my. I remember being here and seeing a bullet hole through the back door. But there was more than one bullet hole through the back door. In fact, there's one. But I mean, you can't. I don't know what kind of hole that is. I don't know. I don't understand it. But I didn't understand it then either. I don't understand it now either. Before I left Greenwood, I decided to go back to City Hall and to have a chat with the mayor to see if he could help me find the police records.
Oh, I'm Sally Harrison.
I'm Harry Smith.
At first, he was
Pleased to meet
angry
you.
and wanted to know why I wanted this information, that Mississippi had gotten a lot of bad publicity, and that it's changed a lot over the years.
And I'll let you see that.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that happened.
Oh, I am too. I'm looking for documentation, though.
I don't know what the, how long they retain records like that.
The records would really be demystifying.
If they've looked for them and they haven't found them, I can only accept that they haven't found them, which doesn't mean that they're not there. That just means they haven't found them. If you wish to file a public information request, it's going to take a good bit of time. If you wish us to proceed, then we can do that.
I hate for Sally to think that somebody killed her daddy on purpose, because they did not. That didn't happen. Well, if it's going to get somebody, that got me. Because I was the one that was always, he never got any threatening calls like I did. And no,
We knew from time to time that there were a number of progressive whites, and we would get a call from white women. And they would tell us about being careful because certain things are supposed to happen this evening and is gonna go down, so we thought it'd be good for y'all to know. One of the reasons it was so important that the identity of who was given the information was not revealed is because they would be attacked, even in many instances, more viciously than we as blacks.
The cost of being a moderate was extreme. Even to just stand up and say, I don't believe in integration, but we should treat black people better, and we should really give them equal schools and equal facilities. That was enough to, get you a visit from the Klan, or a Molotov cocktail thrown on your porch, or a bomb.
Dear Ms. Harrison, I am in receipt of your letter concerning police reports to the Greenwood Police Department relating to the death of your father, Henry Harrison. I'm sorry to report that a record of this incident cannot be located in the current records department or the archives. I do not have any idea of how the police department would have conducted the investigation or what has become of the paperwork. A.W. Crowder, as well as numerous police officers that would have been employed at that time, are no longer living. Therefore, no information can be obtained from anyone that was directly involved in the investigation. If you desire, I'll give you access to any records that are currently under the control of the Greenwood Police Department for your viewing to see if you might find anything of interest. Sincerely, R.L. White, Chief of Police. Well, the police chief wasn't very encouraging, but he did say we could pursue looking for police records, so I thought it was worth one more trip to Greenwood. And I wanted to see if I could get into the building where Daddy's store had been. I was really surprised to learn that Murray Kornfeld had expanded his retail store into Daddy's part of the building.
This was his building. I remember as a kid coming in here, it's not a very wide store, but it was jammed up. Mr. Harrison was like Mr. Kornfeld. If he found a space, he put something in it. And he had merchandise stacked all the way up in this place. It's the same old concrete floor that he walked on. I mean, we never changed anything. This was his building, and he went through the front door, and he just supposedly just ran right through the back. That is the same back door back there, and went through the screen, and that was it. But this was his building. The metal door, as far as I know, the inside door, is the original door. My God, it would take a bomb. Iraq hadn't got anything to blow that thing down, I don't believe. It catches it. I think this is original. Got to raise up the wood, it'll come out. I don't know who invented that little jewel, but it's worth its weight in gold. But we had to change the screen door because it was just in shambles. So we changed it out.
Murray Kornfeld told me that he had put an old piece of sheet metal over the outside of the back door since I'd been there last. The bullet hole wasn't there anymore. And it struck me what a long building it is and how far it is from the front of the store to the back of the store. Daddy would have had to open the latch, and then the bullet would have gone through the back alley door and the screen door? Now, A.W. Crowder wouldn't have been able to see him through the door. Next, I went back to the Greenwood Police Department. Now, I recognized the receptionist. She and I had gone to high school together. I asked about looking into other places for the missing records and about seeing photographs of the 1966 police force and how could I get those. Well, she went and asked someone in charge. She said, I'll tell you what you do. You go to the little red building next to the library and you ask the widow of the assistant police chief because she's got a lot of memorabilia from the police officers. She wanted to know why we wanted these photographs and that someone had looked at her photographs about a year and a half ago and some of them had ended up missing and that she didn't show her photographs to people anymore. And that was that. Then she asked if I knew anyone from Greenwood and I said, I'm from Greenwood. I said, my father was Henry F. Harrison who had Harrison's Army store. And she said,
oh, I know why you're here. Come sit down.
She said, what happened that night was very painful and it affected my life too. My husband carried a scar with him to his grave. He was grazed by the bullet that killed your father. And all that blood on the floor wasn't just your father's blood. She said, you see, my husband was a diabetic, and he was on Coumadin, a blood thinner. He was with your father, and went back into the back of the store with him.
He was so close to him that he was grazed by the bullet that killed your father.
Who else were there?
Chief was there, the assistant chief, my husband. There were patrolmen there, 4 or 5 of them.
I said, well, I don't understand how this happened. She said, well, one of the policemen thought he saw
the shadows in the
shadows
store.
and
So he ran around the side and started shooting.
well, maybe they weren't trained very well in those days.
Oh, yes, they were. They were trained at the FBI Academy. They all had excellent training back then.
And she said, you know, that the things that happened back then, she said that was a very troubling time, and there were a lot of things that happened, and I'm just not going to go into that. She said, I had a reporter here a year and a half ago who tried everything he could to get me to say something ugly about the Greenwood Police Department, and I wouldn't do it. And he pushed me, and he pushed me. He did everything, tried to turn things around to try to get me to talk about the Greenwood Police Department.
I finally went over to my bureau, and I got out my .45, and only then did he leave.
She said, I have the pictures, and I have memorabilia and things that have been collected over the years, but those things are all put up now.
And I don't want you using my name.
You know, no one ever told me, and how would I know that a man had a scar that he took to his grave because he was grazed by the bullet or the bullets that killed my father. There were enough people to get him to his store, to get him inside the door, and another person to walk him in to where he's at the place where he is shot. If there were a conspiracy, there would certainly be enough people and enough skilled people to have pulled that off. I find that more ominous because that many people were involved. If it were 1 or 2 people, it would have been a lot easier to assume that there was this miscommunication. You know, your father rushed in and the policeman mistook him for a burglar and killed him. Well, I don't know about that now. When I hear that there were 7 or 8 police officers there at 11 o'clock at night, including the chief of police and the assistant chief of police, then it sounds more like an execution than an accident. The truth is like this river that does not flow evenly, and it's swirling and it takes strange twists. The honesty that I could have heard, we made a terrible mistake and this is how we made it, could have caused closure.
The local police and the Klan, in many instances, were the same people. Not only in the police department, but it was the county sheriff department, and it also went high up as far as the FBI.
Well, you know what they say, that it takes one to know one, and Hiding Carter III was another white middle-class businessman who had liberal views back in the 60s. He and his father were newspaper editors in Greenville, Mississippi. This was about 50 miles from Greenwood.
I always thought that they did not actually dare go so far as to kill a local white who was part of the establishment, by which I simply mean part of the economic or business or social structure of a community. Scared as I was for most of the time that I was back there, from 59 at least until 70, The last thing in the world I would have suspected, in all honesty, was that a member of the business establishment of Greenwood would have been enough out of step to be a threat to any of those guys. I didn't believe it until that great citizen of Greenwood, DeLay, started asking for the outlines of our house and road and what have you from a boy who happened to be the son of a friend, worked in the same chemical company DeLay was the salesman for. At that point, I figured, oh, maybe they really don't care and that they'll just about kill anybody. It's memory of that that makes me more than open to the thought that there was, in fact, a deliberate effort to kill your dad, or that it happened in other places I know nothing about.
So you might think I didn't get an answer to my question about what happened to my father. Just like I didn't get an answer when I wrote to J Edgar Hoover about how come Emmett Till's killers could go free. But I did get answers in both cases. The biggest lawman in the United States of America had told me essentially to shut up, that he did not want to be questioned about this case, which brought race and racism into the forefront of American society. And in going back to Mississippi to find out what happened to Daddy, I learned that when somebody dies under highly questionable circumstances, the more light that can be shed on what happened, then the less likely you are to suspect wrongdoing. And I want my grandsons to know that their Southern white great-grandfather stood up for racial equality when it was life-threatening to do so. And I hope his example will strengthen them so that when they face racism in America, to question authority, to not shut up, to not be discouraged and silenced by authority, no matter what kind of criticism or how intimidating or how dismissive people might be. And I hope they will always keep their joy and their spirit. It runs in the family.